Good day. In the next minutes, as the title suggests, I will give you some insight in the analog to digital switchover process in the Caribbean. 9 years ago, a treaty agreement was signed at the conclusion of ITU's Regional Radio Communication Conference about the development of all digital terrestrial broadcast services for sound and television. According to this treaty, the digitalization of broadcasting in Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Iran should be established by 2015. In a press release, it was mentioned that this agreement would be extrapolated by other regions and countries. This is especially true for the Caribbean. The Caribbean Broadcasting Union held its first Digital Transition Forum in Barbados in 2011, where all aspects of the digital switchover were discussed. Also the next year at the Annual General Assembly in Antigua, 2013 in Guyana, where also representatives of the American and European systems held presentations, and last year in Suriname. I had the honor to present the CBU policy paper, which was the result of a working group of the CBU established by the CBU board in 2013. Except for a handful of Caribbean countries such as the Bahamas, Curaçao, Cuba, and Suriname, most television broadcasts in the region remain analog. Critical decisions should be made about the digital standard to be adopted, the compression standard to be embraced, the multiplexing methodology, effective switchover date, and financial and regulatory costs. Countries and the Caribbean can choose from the following standards: ATSC, DVB-T2, ISDB-T, and DTMB. Despite all efforts which would result in a harmonized approach, we must recognize that there is no harmonized approach. What is the current situation? The Bahamas has chosen for the ATSC system, Curaçao for DVB-T2, Cuba for DTMB, and Suriname for ATSC for free-to-the-air television and DVB-T2 for subscriber television. The standard to be selected heavily depends on consumer preferences and each country's acquisition capabilities. The fact that most television sets in the English-speaking Caribbean and Suriname have built-in ATSC tuners is an important aspect in choosing a standard. For any other system, converter boxes or set-top boxes are required to receive the digital signal. There is no licensee regime in most countries. Introduction of a national multiplex system or a single signal distributor regime without proper regulatory guidelines and clear new business models would have serious repercussions for broadcasters and can result in job losses in the industry. The CBU policy paper calls on regulators and government agencies considering multiplex solutions to carefully consider the implications and actively engage in discussions with all stakeholders on new business models to be adopted. As the digital television conversion takes place globally, millions of obsolete television sets, along with outdated computers and cell phones, are being trashed in what some call the digital age dirty little secret. The CBU supports the development of proper procedures for the disposal of obsolete analog television equipment. Further, that the relevant government agency or regulatory authority in each country should consider proper disposal of analog television sets an important regulatory requirement and establish the necessary procedures and facilities for the safe disposal of equipment with associated penalties for non-compliance. The CBU is spearheading the movement to formulate and implement policies in relation to a responsible approach related to the dumping of digital waste. Last month saw the launching of the e-waste project funded by the ITU. This project will formulate model policies and laws in the areas of environmental standards, electronic waste management, and recycling of televisions, mobile phones, and computers. The model policies also include anti-dumping regulations for televisions that don't conform to regional requirements and international standards. We in the Caribbean are also aware of the advantages of digital over analog transmission. Digitalization of television will result in expanded services, higher quality video and audio, and a greater variety and faster rates of data transmission. However, due to the economic situation in general in our countries and the production capacities of television companies, most stations will not be able to benefit from the multiplexing possibilities, as most broadcasters don't have sufficient content to fill in the capacity on more than one channel. On the other hand, a broadcaster with multiplex capacity can create a business model which can result in increased revenues by renting the surplus of channels. Regulators and policymakers throughout the region should be aware of the tight financial reality currently facing most countries. It may be hard for most broadcast stations to fund the transition from analog to digital without proper planning. Broadcasters will be required to invest in new studio, program and production equipment, ENG/OB equipment, transmitters, antennas, and towers, which in some cases will cost tons of dollars. It has been proposed that governments could assist broadcasters by reducing or waive of customs duty and taxes to compensate for the new investment in digital equipment. Advertising agencies and suppliers of digital equipment can also play a role in reducing the cost for the broadcasters. The CBU calls upon policymakers and regulators in the region to create a well-defined roadmap covering national strategies and key decisions involving all stakeholders. The CBU further strongly recommends that relevant authorities allow stations time to make the transition up to 10 years. The CBU also calls upon policymakers to take a phased approach to new regulatory fees and educate the public. These recommendations are also part of a resolution approved by the Annual General Assembly in Suriname in 2014. I will finish this presentation with some of the findings of a recent study on digital transition in the Caribbean conducted by LS Telcom, commissioned by the CTU. The report is based on a survey in 8 participating countries. The conclusions are: there should be no mandatory digital terrestrial television or set-top box standard for the Caribbean. Instead, countries should be free to select the ones which best suits their local market conditions. There is no need for a frequency per broadcaster, as few of the broadcasters in the region have sufficient content to fill all the capacity on a multiplex. New distribution models where transmitter provider is not necessarily a broadcaster or where broadcasters work together should be encouraged, such that the cost of digital switchover can be shared. Caribbean-wide multiplex and transmission service provider may offer economies of scale that could reduce costs. There is need for a strong regulatory or commercial framework to safeguard the interests of, in particular, public service and government broadcasters. Content delivery platform providers should be encouraged to find ways of ensuring that the content is delivered free to the end user. no mandatory switchover date should be set. However, it may be useful to consider an analog switch-off date of 2020 to encourage the move to other delivery platforms, including, where appropriate, digital terrestrial. Thank you all.